After we created the dimension from the Dimension Wizard and the cube from the Cube Wizard, we need to refine our project. It is very important to deploy the cube once changes are made. If an error happens during some of these changes, it is easier to find the problem and fix while the change is still fresh in your mind. There are best practices when developing a dimension and cube, and these pop up as warnings. When you deploy a cube, you'll see the indicator based on the warning, which is a little squiggly line under a particular object properties. If you hover your mouse over this line, you will see the warning and the details of the changes that might be needed. These warnings can also be disabled if they're not valid. We're going to refine the dimensions because the dimensions created with the Cube Wizard are going to need some modifications. Additional attributes are going to need to be added with the data types and the attribute information. The Dimension Designer will be used to make these changes. Natural and user-defined hierarchies are added in this designer, as well as attribute relationships to help with the performance of deployment. Once we refine the dimensions, then we'll look at the measures. We're going to be able to rename measures and measure groups that are included in the Cube Designer. The other options include adding new measures, measure groups, and calculations. If the dimension relationship between the dimension table and the fact table was not created in the wizard, the Dimension Usage tab will handle the dimension to measure group relationship, and we'll show an example of this. More intermediate and advanced options include aggregation and perspectives, as well as KPIs, actions, and translations. Let's talk about refining the dimension. First thing we'll talk about is adding attributes. Additional attributes will need to be added for some of the dimensions, like product color, size, and list price. The sales territory is going to need a hierarchy. That hierarchy we're going to create is group, country, and region. When we get to the customer dimension, we're going to want to concatenate the first and last names together for a full customer name. We're also going to add logic to interpret the single character gender into a more descriptive value. Next, we're going to look at adding hierarchies. Natural hierarchies are like the date dimension, which has a relationship between year, quarter, month, and date. We can create this natural hierarchy in the dimension. A user-defined hierarchy might be that the users or the business requires a color by size comparison. We'll be able to create this in the product dimension. The last thing we're going to look at is the difference between an attribute and a member property. Some columns, like phone number in a customer dimension, are not needed for slicing and dicing. So they have an attribute hierarchy enable property set to false. This makes the column a member property instead of an attribute hierarchy. This also helps with deployment performance. And once this attribute is named a member property, it is still available for display at the key level. Let's look at refining dimensions with the Dimension Designer. So we're going to demonstrate how to refine our dimension. Before we start, we need to launch SQL Server Data Tools. We'll go to the Start menu, start typing SQL Server Data Tools, and Windows 8.1 seems to be smart enough to know where we need to go, so we're just going to hit the Enter key, and we bring up a blank Visual Studio environment. We're going to go to the File menu choice, to Recent Projects and Solutions, and pick the solution we have been working on. Once it's up, we'll pin the Solution Explorer to our right window. We're going to start by refining dimensions. We're going to need to add additional attributes to some of these dimensions. The first one we're going to look at is the customer dimension. We'll double-click the customer dimension to open up the Dimension Designer. The first thing we're going to do is in the attributes list to the far left pane, we're going to rename customer key to be customer. And then we're going to go to the data source pane, right-click on customer, and go to edit data source view. Here we're going to find the customer dimension, right-click, and add a new calculation or a new named calculation. We're going to create customer name, give it a description, and then in the expression we're going to put last name first, concatenate a comma with a space plus the first name. Once we create this, we can click OK. If there's an error, it will provide a message for us. In this case, there were no errors, so we'll right-click Customer and explore data. Once the sample data comes up, if we scroll to our far right, we'll see our new customer name column. Let's close this view, right-click on Customer, and at this same place, add a new named calculation. We'll type gender name. This will be the full gender name. And we can actually do a case statement. We could say case when gender equals single quote M single quote, then male. Else, we could say female. And then end. And if we click OK, we should be able to get to that new calculation. Now, that's one place to put it. I'm going to go ahead and edit it and show you another place. I'm going to copy this code, cancel, right-click the column, and delete. I need to right-click the column and delete this column, not the table. We'll right-click Customer, replace the table with a named query, and then we can actually go into the T-SQL, add a comma, paste our code, but we need a name, so we'll say as gender name, and then if we run this query, we will see the new gender name to our far right. We'll click OK, save our data source view, close it, and go back to our customer dimension. And now we should see those two fields available to us. We'll go back to the customer key, and we're going to look at its properties. I'll right-click on that attribute, click Properties from the submenu, and I'm going to pin this down, which will bring it in our lower right window. Here, towards the bottom of the category ordered list, we have a name column. And here we can add a different binding than the customer key. If we scroll down to the bottom, there is our customer name. We're going to add other demographic type fields to our attribute list, and these include gender, phone number, our English occupation and education, number of children at home, as well as total children, yearly income, email, and marital status. We'll drag those to our attributes, and now we have a full list of attributes for our customer. I'm going to right-click the project and deploy. Remember, the first thing we talked about is as you're making these changes, you should deploy your solution to make sure there are no errors. Once we've gone through the deployment, we can go to the browser, and we can now see that the customer level is a name and is not the key. We're going to close the customer dimension there and go to sales territory. Here, the sales territory has a sales territory key. There is no description for this key, so the first thing we're going to do is make the attribute hierarchy visible false. This will make it where it will not display the key when browsing that dimension. Next, we're going to click Region, Country, and Group in our Data Source View pane and drag those to the attributes. Next, we're going to rename these new attributes. We're going to remove the sales territory from each one of these. I'm highlighting, hitting F2 to rename, the home key, and then tabbing across to delete the part of the description. We'll do that for region as well. Now we'll deploy to see what we have. Once it's deployed and there are no errors, we can go to the browser. Once we reconnect, we can see we have a country, group, and region. The confusing part is we don't know the order that these need to go in. That's when a hierarchy can help the most. So let's go to the cube we deployed, go to the Browser tab, and then click the Analyze in Excel button. We'll enable the ODC connection, and we'll take sales amount as our value. If we go look at the sales territory dimension and we put region, group, and country, it can get real confusing to the user what order these need to be in. Is it region, group, country? Is it group, region, country? Or finally, it's going to be group, country, region. So once we know that order, we'll minimize Excel, go back to our sales territory dimension designer, and back to the dimension structure. Here we'll create a new hierarchy. We'll drag group to the hierarchy pane, we'll drag country under group, and we'll drag region under country. And then we'll rename this as our sales territory by group. And that is our new hierarchy. Since we created something new, we're going to deploy. And as there are no errors after the deployment, we can actually go back to Excel, which is minimized, go to the data ribbon, and refresh all. We'll see now that there's a sales territory by group hierarchy. So from the rows area, if we drag those three attributes off and now drag our sales territory by group, we by default have the correct order of these hierarchies. Now we know that it's the group level, the country, and then the region, and the end user does not have to be confused by the order. Let's minimize Excel and go back to our Solution Explorer. The last one we're going to look at to change the dimension will be product. I'm going to close our existing windows, scroll down in the Solution Explorer till I see product, and double-click product. Here now we have the product, category, and subcategory keys. We'll rename each one of these attributes to remove the key part of the name. Once we remove the key part of the name, now we got to give each one of them a name column to display. If we highlight product and go down in the list of properties and to column name, we're going to find the English product name. Now what's interesting, if we go to product subcategory, since it is a related snowflake schema table, when we go to subcategory to the name column, we'll notice when we click the ellipse that the actual column binding and source table are now product subcategory instead of product. Here now we could just select the English product subcategory name. If we go to product category, we'll see the exact same thing, except now it's on product category, and we could pick the category name there as well. We're going to add some additional attributes before finishing with this, such as color, list price, and size. And as I drag those from the data source view to the attribute panes, I'll need to deploy this cube to make sure everything is okay. Remember, as you're making these changes, deploying will help ensure that if an error occurs, you can fix it immediately. The last thing we're going to do is that our user decided that they want a color by size, unnatural, or user-defined hierarchy. Here we'll rename that hierarchy color by size, and we'll leave the color and size visible in our attribute list. We'll deploy again, and with the help of Excel, we'll just launch Excel again with the previously connected source to our pivot table, and we'll go to the data ribbon and refresh all. Once we refresh all, we'll notice that color by size hierarchy under product dimension. You'll also notice once a hierarchy is created, then more fields is added to that dimension listing, which makes it more readable for the end user. I'm going to drag that hierarchy to the columns, and now we've sliced by color and size and by group, country, and region for sales territory.